Every night, when rural Oregon falls silent, a massive elephant steps out of the forest and walks for miles in the dark. It isn't looking for water. It doesn't damage crops. It isn't searching for a mate. Its only destination is a small cow barn owned by a former railroad technician. At first, everyone assumes danger. But what no one expects is that the reason this elephant returns night after night comes from a memory the man himself left behind long ago. Fog lay low over the hayfields outside Cedar Ridge, Oregon, turning the pasture lights into small, floating moons. Ethan Miller stood on his porch with a chipped coffee mug, listening to the steady breathing of his dairy cows and the far-off rush of the river. Nights like this used to calm him, back when tracks and timetables made the world predictable. He'd left the railroad 2 years ago, a knee injury and too many overnight calls finally wearing him down. Still, his mind kept running like a signal system. Check the eye, gates, scan the fence line, note what's different. The barn sat 100 yards out, silvered by dew, and everything looked normal, until his cattle all lifted their heads at once, perfectly in sync. It wasn't panic, no frantic bawling, no stampede, just a collective stillness, like an audience waiting for a curtain to rise. Ethan set the mug down and walked through wet grass, boots soaking, the old habit of inspect first, worry later, guiding each step. The cows watched him pass, calm eyes reflecting the porch light as if they were studying him. At the far edge of the lot, his motion light flickered, then settled. Ethan froze. He heard nothing but a low, hollow sound, air moving through trees, or something bigger breathing beyond them. His dog, Rusty, usually loud at shadows, stayed tight to Ethan's leg, tail stiff. That alone put a cold knot in Ethan's stomach, sharper than the night air. He swept his flashlight across the fence and caught a glimpse of movement at the tree line. One dark shape, then nothing. The beam found no eyes, no fur, no obvious threat. Yet the cows didn't go back to feeding. They simply stood, ears angled forward, as if recognizing a presence they couldn't name but didn't fear, the way people fall quiet in church. Ethan tried to tell himself it was a black bear or a wandering elk. Oregon had plenty of both, and the farm backed up to miles of timber. But the air felt different, heavy with a kind of attention. He'd worked around locomotives powerful enough to shake the ground, and this felt like that, pressure without noise, like something massive choosing to be gentle. He circled the barn, hand on the latch of the side gate, checking the chain like he used to check couplers on a cold night shift. Everything held. No torn wire, no broken boards, not a single hoofprint out of place. The rational part of him wanted proof, a clear cause, something he could fix, not a story he couldn't explain. A pickup rolled past on the county road, slow enough to make him glance up. Through the windshield he saw Linda Parker, his nearest neighbor, returning from late feed runs. She didn't stop, but her headlights washed over Ethan and the barn, and for a moment the shadows behind the trees looked deeper, as if hiding a doorway. Ethan wondered if she'd heard the same strange hush he was standing in. When the light faded, the cows exhaled almost in unison. A few went back to chewing cud. Ethan stood in the damp, feeling foolish for being rattled by a flicker and a sound he couldn't even describe. Then Rusty pulled hard toward the fence, whining, not chasing, not barking, just pleading to go closer, as if the dog needed Ethan to understand something. Ethan followed Rusty to the corner post, where the ground turned from grass to packed clay. His flashlight beam landed on an impression so wide his brain refused it at first. Round, deep, clean-edged, another beside it, and another. Each one was bigger than a dinner plate, pressed into the earth with a weight that didn't belong on this property. He crouched and traced the rim with 2 fingers. The soil was still wet, meaning the prints were fresh. Hours old, maybe less. 4 toe marks sat like knuckles around the curve, and the center pad showed a faint pattern, almost like a fingerprint. Ethan swallowed, the way he used to when a freight came through too fast in sleet, and you had to trust the brakes. The track line didn't wander. It moved with intention, skirting the outside of the barnyard as if patrolling. No scrambling, no sudden turns, No signs of a struggle. Whoever, or whatever, made these prints had walked like it knew the route. Ethan stood and looked toward the forest, heart thumping a slow, stubborn rhythm, his palms damp on the grip. A branch snapped somewhere beyond the fence. Ethan lifted the beam, but it caught only mist and the glossy leaves of fir and alder. Rusty tucked his head low. The cows stayed quiet, almost respectful. Ethan felt the rise of fear, then something else beneath it, an uneasy curiosity he couldn't shut off, like a signal light blinking in the dark, asking him to come closer. Back on the porch, he didn't go inside right away. He watched the barn until the first hint of gray touched the sky. In the distance, something large moved through the trees with a steady, unhurried pace, never stepping into the open. Ethan told himself he'd imagined it. Still, as dawn crept in, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a one-time visit. Morning came thin and pale, the kind that made the world look washed clean. Ethan Miller walked the fence line with a thermos of coffee, moving the way he used to along a rail yard, slow, deliberate, eyes down, mind measuring distances. The prints were still there, dark hollows in the clay, as if the night had left a message. He'd seen big tracks before, elk, black bear, the occasional cougar sign, enough to keep a farmhand humble. But these weren't Oregon tracks. These were the kind of marks you'd expect in a zoo exhibit, not a pasture behind a feed store and a two-lane highway. He stared until the shape stopped feeling impossible and started feeling real. Inside the barn, the cows acted like nothing had happened. They pushed their muzzles into fresh hay, tails swishing lazily, milk ready and steady. A young heifer bumped Ethan's shoulder, searching for a scratch behind the ear. Their calm was almost insulting, like they were letting him be the only one scared. Ethan tried to do what he always did when something didn't make sense: build a sequence. He remembered the porch light flicker, Rusty's silence, the heavy sense of attention in the trees. He replayed it like a signal failure on a rainy night, the kind that could turn dangerous if you guessed wrong. Still, every time he reached for a conclusion, it slipped away. He stopped by the mailbox and found Linda Parker waiting at the end of the gravel drive, arms folded tight inside her flannel. Linda had the posture of someone who'd survived hard winters and harder neighbors. She didn't say hello, just nodded toward the ground. "You see it too," she said, voice low, like she didn't want the woods to hear. Ethan showed her the prints without a word. Linda's face didn't brighten with wonder. It tightened with dread. She told him a story about a circus train derailment decades back, animals escaping for days, legends that never fully died. "Sometimes," she said, "things don't go where they're supposed to go, and when they do, they don't leave easy." That afternoon, Ethan drove into town for Feed and Answers, the old truck rattling over potholes. At the co-op, the radio was talking about weather and weekend football. Normal life rolling on like nothing strange lived at the edge of his field. He mentioned the tracks to the cashier, a woman named Marcy, and watched her smile fade as if he'd spoken a bad word. "Call Fish and Wildlife," Marcy told him, lowering her voice. "Or the sheriff. Don't wait." A man stacking salt blocks nearby shook his head and muttered that people were seeing all kinds of things lately. Ethan felt heat climb his neck. He didn't want to be the guy spreading rumors. He wanted to be the guy with proof. Back home, he walked the pasture again, this time studying his herd the way a technician studies gauges. No bunching up. No nervous pacing. No wide, rolling eyes. The calves napped in the sun like they owned the place. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the cows knew something he didn't, and that whatever visited at night had already been accepted. As dusk fell, he made his first change. Not a dramatic one, just a practical adjustment. He moved a floodlight to cover the south corner of the barnyard and replaced a weak battery in his motion sensor. He checked the locks twice. He told himself he was being smart, not scared, even as his hands moved a little faster than usual. Night settled in, and with it came that same peculiar quiet. Rusty refused to leave the porch steps, nails clicking on wood as he shifted his weight. Ethan sat on a bucket near the barn door, listening to the gentle chew of cows and the distant hush of wind in fir trees. The calm felt staged, like the world was holding its breath for a cue. Then, near midnight, the cows lifted their heads again, slow, almost graceful. One calf walked to the fence, as if curious, not frightened. Ethan's skin prickled. He followed the calf's gaze toward the tree line, and for the first time he thought he saw the outline clearly. A massive curve of shoulder, the swing of a trunk, the faint shimmer of something like tusk in moonlight. His pulse jumped hard, and every sensible thought scattered. He'd worked around engines that could crush steel, but this was different. Alive, watching, choosing. He wanted to run. He also wanted to step forward and understand. Rusty whined once, soft and pleading, and Ethan felt the animal fear in his own chest answer back. The shape didn't charge. It didn't tear at the fence. It simply stood there, partly hidden, and the barnyard stayed calm as a Sunday morning. After a long minute, the presence shifted, silent as drifting fog, circling along the outside edge the way the tracks had promised it would. Ethan realized he was witnessing a routine, not an accident. By the time the sky began to lighten, the woods were empty again. Ethan walked out to the fence and found a new set of prints laid over the old ones, neat and measured. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt unsettled, and strangely, a little honored. Whatever this was, it wasn't lost. It was coming here on purpose. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the ordinary sounds Ethan wished would drown out the strange ones. Cows shifting in stalls, a tractor starting somewhere down the valley, a crow arguing with the wind. He tried to keep his routine steady, but his eyes kept drifting to the fence line, as if the ground might confess. He found Linda Parker's truck, already parked near his gate. She stood by the fence with a folded newspaper under her arm and a phone in her hand, the screen lit with a half-written message. "People talk," she said, not unkindly. "They talk when they're scared, and they're getting scared." By noon, the talking had a shape. A county deputy named Ray Collins pulled up in a dusty cruiser, polite but firm, hat low over tired eyes. He asked Ethan to walk him to the tracks. Ray didn't joke, didn't tease. He just stared at the prints a long time, then glanced at the woods like he didn't fully trust them. Ray said he'd gotten 3 calls already, 2 from neighbors, 1 from someone in town who heard there was a wild elephant. Ethan felt his face heat up. He hadn't told half the people who were suddenly sure they knew his business. The deputy's calm made it worse, like the situation had already outgrown Ethan's control. At the feed store that afternoon, the whispers turned into a wall. Men Ethan had known for years stopped mid-sentence when he walked in. Marcy at the counter gave him a look that was half warning, half sympathy. Someone asked if he was trying to make money off a circus beast. Someone else joked about selling tickets. Nobody laughed. A soft-spoken older man named Harold Kimball approached Ethan by the pallets of grain. Harold ran the only small dairy left on the far side of Cedar Ridge, and his voice carried weight, because he never wasted it. "If it's real," he said, "it'll bring trouble, not just from the animal, from people who come looking." That line stuck in Ethan's head on the drive home. He'd spent years on the railroad watching how rumors worked, how a minor delay could turn into a full-blown panic once people filled in the blanks. A farm was the same, just quieter. Fear didn't need facts. It only needed space to grow. That evening, a meeting formed without calling itself a meeting. 2 neighbors pulled into Ethan's driveway, then 2 more. A rancher named Pete Lawson talked fast and loud, insisting Ethan was putting everyone at risk. A younger woman, Kayla, said her kids were scared to wait for the school bus near the woods. Ethan tried to explain what he'd seen. No damage, no aggression, cattle calm as ever. Pete cut him off, saying calm didn't mean safe. Linda stood slightly apart, watching Ethan's face instead of the argument, as if she could tell he was holding something back, something he didn't have words for yet. The pressure built until it felt like the air changed. Pete said he'd call in a team to run it off. Ray the deputy, now standing beside his cruiser, warned everyone to slow down and let fish and wildlife handle it. Ethan heard the phrase, before someone gets killed. And his stomach dropped, because fear always looks for a body. 4. The first time, Ethan raised his voice. Not shouting, just sharp enough to cut through the noise. He told them no one was coming onto his land, with guns, fireworks, or dogs. He said he'd call the proper people himself. The words came out steadier than he felt, like a man holding a gate closed against a flood. After the trucks left, the yard fell quiet, in a way that made Ethan lonely. He sat on the porch steps with Rusty's head on his boot, staring at the barn lights. The cows moved with their usual slow confidence. Unaware, they'd become the center of a town's anxiety. Ethan wondered if he'd just made himself the villain in their story. Near midnight, he didn't sit inside like Linda advised. He stayed close to the barn, listening. The night carried that same unnatural stillness, but now it was mixed with something else. Human tension, the sense that eyes might be watching from the road. Ethan's fear wasn't only of the woods anymore. It was of what scared people might do. A set of headlights swept across the pasture from the county road, pausing longer than necessary. Ethan held his breath. Rusty stiffened. Then the lights moved on, and the darkness returned. Ethan realized with a cold clarity that whatever was coming at night wasn't the only danger circling his farm. When the woods finally stirred, it happened softly, almost respectfully. The distant shape moved along the tree line, never stepping into full view. The cows lifted their heads, then relaxed again, as if reassured by a familiar presence. Ethan's heart eased just a fraction, and he hated that he felt safer with the unknown than with his own neighbors. By dawn, fresh prints marked the clay once more, measured, purposeful, circling the barn like a quiet patrol. Ethan looked at them and didn't feel the old panic. He felt a grim resolve settle in. If he was going to get answers, he'd need more than arguments and guesses. He'd need proof, before fear turned into something irreversible. The change showed up in the ledger before it showed up in Ethan's confidence. Morning after morning, the numbers climbed by small, stubborn increments. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make him double-check the scale and rinse the meters twice. He'd learned on the railroad that small deviations mattered more than big ones. Big ones announced themselves. Small ones rewrote outcomes. By midweek, the milk tank filled earlier than usual. The cows ate the same feed, drank the same water, followed the same routine Ethan had refined for years. Yet they rested longer between milking, their breathing slow and even. It felt wrong to enjoy it, like finding extra money in a wallet you didn't remember filling. Ethan called Dr. Hannah Brooks on a gray afternoon, choosing her because she asked better questions than most. She arrived with mud on her tires and a calm that came from long hours in barns. They shook hands, and Ethan didn't mention the tracks right away. He talked about yield curves and sleep cycles, about calm that didn't fit the season. Hannah listened without interrupting, eyes following the herd the way a musician watches hands on a fretboard. She knelt to check hooves, lifted ears, took notes that looked too neat for a working farm. When Ethan finally led her to the fence line, she stopped short, breath hitching just enough to be noticed. "Those aren't from here," she said softly. They worked through the afternoon like technicians chasing a fault. Blood draws, temperature checks, quiet observation. Hannah frowned at the results, then frowned again. Cortisol levels were low across the board. Heart rates were steady. No signs of vigilant stress. "If something big is out there," she said, "your cows don't seem to think it's a problem." That sentence landed hard. Ethan felt the room tilt, the way it used to when a signal cleared against expectation. He told her about the nights, the stillness, the shape in the trees. Hannah didn't laugh. She didn't warn him either. She asked when it started, how long it stayed, where it stood. She drew a rough map with a pen that squeaked. The map made the pattern obvious. The presence traced the perimeter, favoring the south corner with clean sightlines. It avoided the herd's sleeping spots by just enough distance. "That's not random," Hannah said. "That's decision-making." The words sent a ripple through Ethan. Fear, then awe, then a prick of something like gratitude he wasn't ready to name. The emotional peak came when Hannah watched a calf drift toward the fence at dusk, ears relaxed, tail loose. No mother rushed to pull it back. The calf paused, sniffed the air, and lay down as if comforted. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He'd seen men panic trains into wrecks. He'd seen animals read danger better than people. Still, doubt fought back. Ethan pictured Pete's hard eyes, the deputy's careful tone, the rumor mill grinding. "If this is real," he said, "it won't stay quiet." Hannah nodded. She talked about documentation, about cameras that didn't lie, about letting evidence carry the weight. "Numbers tell a story," she said. "So do patterns." They set a small plan. Adjust one light, add a secondary camera, log times and behavior. Nothing flashy. Hannah promised discretion. As she packed up, the sky bruised purple, and the barn lights hummed on. Ethan felt the farm lean into evening like a body finding a familiar chair. Night brought the same hush, but Ethan noticed what he hadn't before. The cows settled sooner. The yard felt watched without feeling threatened. When the presence arrived, it stayed at its usual distance, a curve of mass and patience. Ethan didn't step forward. He let the moment be what it was. Later, alone with the ledger, he wrote the day's numbers and paused. The page looked ordinary, almost boring. He closed the book and listened to the barn breathe. If fear was loud, this was quiet proof. Whatever walked miles to stand guard wasn't stealing from him. It was giving something back. By dawn, the prints overlapped the old ones again, precise as a schedule kept by heart. Ethan didn't touch them this time. He stood back, hands in his pockets, and accepted the strange truth settling in. The facts weren't pushing him toward panic anymore. They were pulling him toward patience, and the resolve to let proof speak before fear did. Rain moved in at sunset, like a slow gray curtain, flattening the hills and smearing the fir trees into shadow. Ethan Miller checked the barn doors twice, more out of habit than fear, then checked the cameras the way he used to check signal relays. One last look before the night shift. The screens glowed steady, and for a moment he believed in routine again. Hannah Brooks had left earlier with a promise to review his logs, and her calm still lingered in the barn like warm light. Ethan wrote down feed amounts, milking times, and the odd, steady uptick in yield. The numbers felt comforting, but outside, the wind began to rattle the gutters, and the comfort thinned out fast. Linda Parker called just after dark. Her voice was tight, clipped by the kind of worry that didn't need explaining. She said Pete Lawson had been talking again, about handling it if officials dragged their feet. Ethan told her he had cameras and a plan. Linda paused, then said, "Plans don't mean much in a storm." By 10, the rain turned heavy, drumming the roof in a way that made the whole house feel hollow. Ethan stepped into the mudroom to check the monitor. The main camera feed flickered once, twice, then froze on a gray smear. He tapped the screen, cursed under his breath, and felt his stomach drop as the display went black. He pulled on his jacket and headed out, Rusty close behind, both of them hunched against the rain. The barn lights threw pale cones onto the yard, but the far corners dissolved into darkness. Ethan kept thinking about the earlier nights, how quiet the woods got before the visitor arrived. Tonight, the woods were loud, and that felt worse. He reached the camera pole and found the line wet, the connection loose. When he tightened it, the feed returned in a stuttering pulse, then steadied. Relief came quick, then vanished when he heard it. A sharp, metallic clink from the south fence, followed by a softer scrape, like a chain being tested. Ethan stopped breathing for half a second. The sound wasn't animal. It had intention, the way a tool does. He angled his flashlight toward the pasture and saw a brief pinprick of light, someone else's beam, then darkness again. Rusty growled low, not barking, like he knew barking would be a mistake. Ethan moved along the barn wall, keeping to the shadow, heart thudding in a slow, stubborn rhythm. Another clink, closer now, and the unmistakable hiss of a whispered voice. His mind snapped into old railroad mode. Identify the hazard. Protect the line. Don't panic the system. But this wasn't steel and schedules. This was his herd. Near the fence corner, two figures hunched low, hands working near the latch. One of them held something long and dark, Bolt cutters, maybe. Ethan's throat went dry. He wanted to yell, to charge, to do anything that would make the moment stop. Instead, he stayed still, watching, waiting for the right second that never came. The emotional peak hit like a punch when the cows shifted inside the enclosure, not in fear but in awareness. A calf bleated once, small and confused, and Ethan felt anger surge hot behind his ribs. This wasn't about rumors anymore. This was real, human danger, right there in the rain. He raised his flashlight, ready to throw the beam. Then the entire yard seemed to change. The rain kept falling, but the air thickened as if something large had stepped into it. From the tree line came a low, vibrating sound, more felt than heard, followed by a heavy, measured footfall. The two men froze. One lifted his head, and in the barn light his face went pale. A massive shape moved between the woods and the fence. Not rushing, not charging, just arriving. It was too big to process all at once. Shoulder, head, the slow swing of a trunk. The figures backed away like tidewater pulled from shore. The elephant took one deliberate step forward, and the men broke, stumbling into the rain and vanishing down the field. Ethan stood there shaking, not from cold. The elephant didn't cross the fence. It didn't trumpet, or thrash, or threaten. It simply held its ground, a living wall, until the last sound of retreat disappeared. The cows settled again, as if the night had been corrected back into place. Minutes later, the shape drifted along the perimeter the way it always did, circling with quiet purpose. Ethan didn't follow. He didn't speak. He watched from the barn's edge, rain dripping from his hair, and felt a strange, humbling truth settle in. He hadn't protected the herd tonight. Something else had. When dawn finally softened the sky, fresh prints marked the clay by the south corner, deeper than any he'd seen yet. Ethan found the fence latch untouched, the chain still locked, the barn intact. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes after near loss, and for the first time he understood why the cows had never been afraid. By morning, the storm had moved east, leaving the farm rinsed and quiet. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table replaying the night frame by frame, like footage you can't stop scrubbing back. The image that stayed with him wasn't the men running. It was the way the elephant had stepped forward, calm as a judge. When daylight felt solid enough to trust, Ethan went straight to the monitors. The main camera had gaps where rain blurred the lens, but the secondary unit, older, simpler, had kept running. Grainy infrared shapes filled the screen, washed in pale greens and whites. Ethan leaned in, breath shallow, afraid of what he might see, and more afraid of what he might miss. There it was, the fence corner. Two human figures bent low, their movements quick and nervous. Then the shift, the moment the night seemed to thicken. A massive outline slid into frame from the trees, not sudden, not aggressive. The men froze, heads turning in unison, as if their bodies understood the danger before their minds did. Ethan watched the elephant's posture again and again. No charge, no display meant to terrify, just a single, deliberate step that closed the distance enough to make a point. The men bolted, their fear loud even without sound. The elephant stayed, filling the frame with stillness, a presence that needed no noise to be understood. He paused the footage and sat back, hands pressed to his thighs. On the railroad, he'd learned to respect machines that didn't waste motion. Efficiency meant intention. This was the same. The elephant hadn't reacted. It had anticipated. Ethan felt a slow awe creep in, threaded with a chill. This wasn't chance. This was a routine, refined by purpose. Hannah arrived before noon, boots muddy, hair pulled back tight. Ethan didn't explain. He just played the clip. She watched without blinking, her expression shifting from focus to something like reverence. When it ended, she let the silence sit. "That," she said finally, "is protective behavior." They went out to the fence together. Hannah crouched at the prints, measuring stride and depth with a practiced eye. "He knows exactly where to stand," she said, "close enough to deter, far enough not to stress your herd." Ethan followed her gaze to the south corner, understanding blooming, late but fast. Hannah pointed to a frame frozen on the monitor. A close pass by the camera, the elephant's head angled just right. "Zoom there," she said. Ethan did, and the image sharpened into something unmistakable, a notch in the ear, a pale line along the temple. Hannah's breath caught. "I've seen him before." The emotional peak hit Ethan hard and quiet. Hannah explained she kept records, distinctive marks, old rescue photos, field notes that lived longer than most memories. 15 years back, a young elephant had been found injured after a freak storm, disoriented and alone. He survived because someone stayed with him, she said, eyes still on the screen. Ethan felt a pressure behind his eyes, a memory stirring without a face. He shook his head, certain she had the wrong man, the wrong story. Hannah didn't argue. She asked where he'd been that winter, years ago, before the farm, before Oregon felt permanent. The room seemed to tilt as a cold night and a small shivering body pressed at the edge of his mind. They didn't say his name yet. They didn't need to. The footage kept playing, the elephant circling the barn in measured arcs, the cows settling as if tucked in. The logic lined up. The emotion lagged, behind, catching up in slow, heavy steps. Ethan felt something crack open, fear giving way to a deeper, harder-to-name recognition. By evening, word had quieted. No trucks idled on the road, no arguments flared. Ethan stood by the fence as the sun slid down, watching the woods darken. When the familiar hush arrived, he didn't brace for it. He waited. Whatever had chosen his barn wasn't a rumor or a threat. It was a presence with a history, and it was coming back. Hannah waited until the house lights were on, before she told the rest of it. She spread old photographs across Ethan's kitchen table, laminated edges worn thin, corners softened by time. In one image, a small elephant calf lay on a tarp under falling snow, ribs too visible, eyes dulled by shock. Ethan stared, a strange ache blooming in his chest. She explained how rare that winter had been, how a freak storm pushed cold air far south and caught wildlife unprepared. Rangers had found the calf near a collapsed culvert, injured and alone. "He wouldn't have made it through the night," Hannah said quietly. "Not without someone staying." The memory broke through like a signal clearing. Ethan remembered the call. An emergency job during his railroad days, a blocked line, a stranded animal. He remembered kneeling in the cold, wrapping his jacket around a trembling body, talking nonsense into the dark to keep himself awake. He remembered leaving before dawn, convinced it hadn't mattered. Hannah pointed to a later photo. The calf stood shakily beside a transport crate, a thin bandage around its leg. A man's boots were visible at the edge of the frame, muddy, familiar. Ethan swallowed. He had never gone back to check. Life had moved him on, mile after mile, job after job, until memory dulled into background noise. That calf grew, Hannah said, recovered, integrated. She slid a final image forward. An adult elephant, years later, earmarked by a clean notch. Temple scar, faint but unmistakable. The same markings Ethan had seen on his monitor. "Elephants don't forget," she added. "Not places, not people." The realization settled heavy and warm at once. Ethan felt foolish for the years he'd dismissed that night as nothing more than a strange shift. The animal had carried it differently, filed it away, returned to it. Miles walked in silence to stand watch over a place that felt like home, or at least like safety remembered. Outside, dusk pressed in, and the cows moved closer, together without fear. Hannah packed her photos, leaving one copy behind. "I won't share this without your say," she told him, "but you should know what you're part of." Ethan nodded, unable to trust his voice. The story felt too large to rush. When Hannah left, Ethan stayed at the table, the photograph beneath his hand. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt small, humbled by a debt he hadn't known existed, repaid with patience instead of noise. The past hadn't disappeared. It had waited. That night, he stood at the fence and watched the woods breathe. The familiar hush arrived, gentle now. The massive shape emerged at its usual distance, paused, and turned its head as if checking a remembered line. Ethan didn't step forward. He didn't wave. He simply stood, letting the truth land. The elephant began its slow circuit, prints falling where prints had fallen before. Ethan felt the final piece lock into place, not fear, not wonder, but recognition. The scar wasn't just a mark, it was a signature, and the miles walked each night were not a mystery anymore. They were a promise, kept. Morning arrived without ceremony, pale light easing over the fields as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Ethan stood at the fence longer than usual, hands deep in his jacket pockets, watching the last shadows retreat into the trees. The elephant was already gone, leaving only the quiet and the faint order of the farm returning to itself. The prints were there, of course, clean, deliberate, circling the barn before turning back toward the woods. Ethan didn't crouch to study them this time. He let them be. Some records didn't need measuring, and some truths didn't improve when handled too much. On the railroad, he'd learned when to log a fault and when to let a system run. By mid-morning, Fish and Wildlife called. Their tone was careful, professional, edged with curiosity rather than alarm. They talked about tracking collars, about relocating the animal farther into protected land. Ethan listened, then spoke slowly, choosing words like switches on a cold line. He asked for time. He asked for restraint. He promised transparency without spectacle. The community pressure softened after that. No more trucks idling at night. No more heated conversations by the gate. Linda brought over a pie and didn't say much, just squeezed his shoulder before leaving. Harold waved from his pickup. Fear, it turned out, could lose interest when nothing fed it. Calm had a way of spreading too. Ethan adjusted the farm, not to trap or attract, but to accommodate. He moved lights to reduce glare, kept the south corner clear, logged times without broadcasting them. The cows thrived in the steady rhythm, their calm a daily confirmation. Numbers held. Sleep returned. The farm felt watched over without feeling owned. Some evenings, Hannah stopped by, and they talked quietly about behavior and memory, about how animals carry maps inside them. She reminded Ethan that this was unusual, not a template. Ethan agreed. He wasn't interested in turning grace into policy. He was interested in honoring it while it lasted. At night, he no longer waited with clenched shoulders. He stood back and let the routine unfold. The elephant arrived, took its place, and kept the dark honest. Ethan felt the urge to speak sometimes, to thank, to explain, but he understood the language here was distance respected and silence kept. Weeks passed. Seasons edged forward. The visits continued, unannounced and unclaimed. No cameras caught what Ethan couldn't already feel, the steadiness of a presence choosing to return. On the railroad, he'd chased schedules across states. Here, something walked miles for reasons that didn't need clocks. One dawn, the prince didn't appear. The cows were calm. The barn stood as it always had. Ethan felt the absence like a held breath released. No loss, no fear, just change. He nodded toward the woods and went about his work, trusting the memory to do what it always had. Years later, when the story surfaced in fragments, people asked Ethan why the elephant walked so far each night just to stand by a cow barn. He never embellished. He said some debts are paid quietly. Some promises are kept without witnesses, and sometimes gratitude chooses its own way home. If this story made you stop and think, I'd love to hear from you. Simply type 1 in the comments if you believe animals. Remember kindness, or type 0 if you're still not sure. Your comment helps this story reach others who might need to hear it. And if you enjoy quiet, true stories like this, stories about memory, loyalty, and the moments that stay with us, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told.